Hey, it's Chris. Let's do this. 5 games, 5 mini reviews, all in a short time span. 3 crowdfunding, 2 non-crowdfunding. What do you need to know? Which ones? How am I feeling about them? Everything that's going to help you make a decision on them. Let's go. First up, Wizards of the Grimoire. This is probably one of the more unique, more clever 1 versus 1 mage style head-to-head spell slinging type games that I've played in a long time. And you can see right up what I've got in front of me here is the market. And this is probably the most clever part of this game, right? It's an ever rotating cast of market cards that are going to be in front of you, and you have a plethora of options that you can choose from. And you're going to be constantly recycling these as you slowly build your tableau in front of your own individual area, because you can only have a certain number of spells that are in your possession at one time. So once your tableau, for example, gets filled up with the requisite number of spells, then you have to take one and replace it. The other interesting aspect of this game is that you have these energy cards. These energy cards are actually cooldown cards more so than anything else, or cards that are going to depend on the cost of the spell in the first place. And the tricky part about this is they're ranging anywhere from values 1 to 4. What matters though, what matters most of the time more, is just the number of the cards that you have. And so you see that this one, for example, is 2, meaning there's a 2 cooldown. I have to be able to play 2 cards on there when I cast it. And then the cooldown mechanic is you remove them turn by turn, round by round, or card by card manipulation, allowing you to remove them faster depending on the spell interactions. You're chaining, you're comboing as you go along. And did I mention the fact that all of these cards in this massive, massive deck are all asymmetric? There's no duplicates here, folks, which means when you have a large market that is constantly being recycled, in combination with your tableau of spells that you are slowly building them up to chain them faster, and then finally reaching a critical breaking point in which you need less chaining and more just slinging attack damage at your opponent, because that's ultimately what this is, right? Reduce your opponent down to 0. You're going to be going back and forth, and you have different types of spells. There are very few constant spells that are always passively in effect, but the majority of them are instantaneous. You do it, it goes. But depending on the color of the spell, the purple, the orange, the green here, it's going to depend on what the spell is going to do, so you know a little bit more about what they are when they're already in front of you in the first place. This game actually makes you feel like you're adjusting to what is in front of you on a constant turn-by-turn basis. Too many of these games, you get into a static rut where you're going, okay, well, I'm going to do this. This is going to be my overarching strategy. And if you do that with this game and you don't adjust to what the other person is doing with their adaptable 6 different spells in their repertoire, again, that's a lot, but don't fear, because it's not overwhelming in one way or the other whatsoever. It's just intuitive. It's nice. The mechanics are great. The cooldown mechanic is probably one of the best I've ever seen in terms of this, and how you refresh it and when you refresh it and how much damage you're doing. It just freaking works. It's one of the most clever games I've played recently, and it's a whole heck of a lot of fun. So this one, I hands down feel like endorsing and saying, if you're looking for something like this, this is a great one to consider picking up, and that's why it's number 1 on this list. Now, in case the spells are too beginner for you, half of these cards are beginner, half of these cards are more advanced, and then you've got a little promo pack here which has even more advanced cards, and so it scales up to how difficult, how meta you want to be. At the same time, you don't get necessarily a meta, because like I said, right, this is all unique cards, which makes the replayability in such a small size, a small box here, if I can actually pick it up, amazing. Amazing. There you go. Second up here, we have Worldbreakers, Advent of the Khanate. Now, this is going to seem a little bit almost Summoner Wars-esque, and that's why I like it. The tension in this game is much more dramatic. Now, with the other Wizards of the Grimoire, you know, it's slinging, right? You're just going. This one, you really have to be not only more strategic, and that's probably the big thing that sets it apart, because there's a big tactical component, but there's a big strategery that you need to have as well. You get these individual decks that are pre-constructed for you, your Worldbreaker, if you will. Then you have your influence track, you have your main actions here, and then you have this nice deck of about 27 cards that is a little bit faction specific and a little bit neutral. Events Instants and followers are going to make up how you're going to play this back and forth. And the interesting thing about this is the round just goes back and forth, one action, one action, one action, and then the end phase. And then guess what? You flip it over and you go in reverse. Second player is now first player is now second, rinse and repeat. And you just go until the end, until someone basically gets 10 power, and via defeating your enemy's followers, as well as developing the locations that you're going to be placing out. And the actions themselves, I was really surprised by. It's relatively straightforward, right? This is one of those games you get one action per turn. And so one action, one action, one action, one action, one action. So you get 4 actions per round, which seems relatively straightforward. Gain a money, draw a card, pay 2 money to gain a standing. Standing is this thing that I showed you earlier. Standing is represented by the symbol in the upper left-hand corner. So you have to have at least that amount of standing to be able to play the card in addition to the cost. And then you also have the ability to develop those locations that I mentioned, or just attack. And attacking and defending is the main other crux, like I said, of getting the 10 points, victory points essentially, that you need. Because you're going to have followers that are going to be sitting on the table in front of you. And they all have your little Magic the Gathering type stats at the bottom, your attack and your health. And everybody deals damage to everybody. So it's not attack and defense. It's just if you have 2 attack and I have 2 health and the other guy has 1 damage or 1 attack and 1 health, well, you know, my guy's going to take 1 damage. Your guy's going to get knocked out. You knock somebody out, you get a power. You've knocked somebody out. Then if you have somebody else that's still not blocked, you attack directly and you gain a power. And that's how you win. But you have to overpower. You have to strategically play these and attack, because you never know how the other person's going to react to what you're doing. The events and location cards that are going to be placed out in front of you as well are slowly revealed via developing them, as I mentioned here, where you put counters on these, remove them, develop the power, and get the bonus that goes along with it. Events, though, are going to prevent you from having an easy way with this. This is a very tense game because resources are short, costs are higher, and how you're actually choosing to strategically play your hand, again, in a very limited way, because you only draw 1 card per round, really matters. You can run out of resources, you can run out of cards in your hand very quickly if you're not playing smart. The tension of this game, of the back and forth, even with the pre-constructed decks, shows a lot of care that's gone into pre-constructing these in the first place. Now, if you want to mix and match them, that's why they give you extra of these standing cards, so you can mix and match and deck construct if you so choose. But a la Summoner Wars, like I said, you don't need to, and you'll get a complete game out of the box in the first place. There's a solo campaign that you can go through that comes with a separate deck that you can play against in addition. But you know what? As a 2-player dueling game, I'm happy just with that aspect. But if you're looking for solo, it also helps you get this to the table as well. It may sound really simple with this 1 action system and these cards that are, you know, multi-use with a couple keywords in there that are, you know, relatively straightforward for the most part. There's a little clarification that you just need to have from the rule book and the aid right here, but nothing overwhelming. I was really actually concerned about that at first, but it's all straightforward. And it does it, again, not in a completely unique way, but in a way that makes me go, yeah, I want to play that again, right? And isn't that the biggest endorsement I can give a game? That I go, okay, yeah. And so this is like Summoner Wars in the sense that you get these individual unique decks. They have a crowdfunding campaign right now for their second one, which is offering a few more individual decks. It's going to allow you customization if you want. But again, this is one that I'd argue if you get it at a lower price point, you just bust out one of the decks and you go. And you find which one you prefer, and you can go back and forth, because the way these followers come out, and even though the fact that there's 27 cards in this, you won't get through them all, but you will also still have a full experience that's different every time, which is also what I'm looking for in a small box head-to-head dueling type game in the first place. The biggest criticism that you might not like, again, is the customization just isn't going to be there if you only have one of these 2 boxes. If you're going to want to be more of a customizable person, you're going to be looking elsewhere probably for games like this. But if you want low price point, easy entry, and complete knowledge of how to play in a very quick setting, this one's good. This one's good, folks. The third one on this list is Starfighter's Rapid Fire from Alley Cat Games. Simultaneous action selection, die rolling, real-time game. And if you know me, those are a lot of words that I like. I am really a huge fan of real time. And so essentially what you're doing is you're taking your 3 colored dice that you have a certain allotment of at the beginning of the game. You take them and you just roll them. and you keep re-rolling them until you get the symbols that match the areas that you do. And then when you do, you call time, essentially. And so what you have allocated is going to allow you to do what you need to do on a turn-by-turn basis on your secondary map. And the tricky part is you do not have enough dice to fill all of the areas. You have catch-all dice, which allow you to actually activate the different command centers that you need to do. And you have to have one for each area. If I want to get more of the lasers, or if I want to get more of my missiles, or if I want to have more of my drive in terms of moving forward or turning, I have to have one of these command actions for every single one that I want to do. You're using dice here to activate the areas, which is going to give you less in the first place to make that action more powerful or meaningful. And how you choose to allocate those dice to the different areas is going to be the tricky part, because you're going to be doing it simultaneously, like I said, against your opponent. And so when is good enough, and when are you looking over your shoulder and trying to figure out, do I have a better plan than the other person because of my dice rolling better and quicker than theirs? And like I said, when you have your spaceships on these hexagonal areas, directionality matters with these, because what you're going to have around your ship, essentially, you're going to have shields that you're going to be able to replenish, represented by these little cubes. And so as you get damaged on a certain side, you lose cubes in a certain area in this place. And so that matters, because if you get shot where there are no shields, then these arrows that take the representation of the ship's hull damage down at the bottom are slowly lost from left to right. Lose all of them, your ship blows up. So you don't even have to be hit in different areas. You don't have to take out all the shields. You can just get taken out by getting repeatedly hit in one area, which is very representative of an actual battle in that sense, right? Go for the weak spot. Don't have to hit them all over and knock it all out, right? Just go for the one weak area, try to maneuver and get around to the same side every single time. There's just something about this game, though. As much as I love real time, it just left me feeling wanting at the same time. The amount of dice was just often a little bit less than was ideal for placement of this. And it often just felt like, because these dice were so sporadically allocated or so hard to get where you wanted to, the turns were less meaningful. Now, there is some asymmetry with the advanced rules, so each of these ships have a little bit difference in terms of versus the lasers and the torpedoes and the engine drives and the shields, and how you want to prioritize or where their strengths are. Maybe this does one more damage, you can control this. The torpedoes are nice because, I mean, they essentially go out there and they sit out there for a turn, and then they start following people, and you can even hit yourself, because they've flipped over, and then they're going to this side to show that they're going after you, and then if you're moving away, it's following you. So there's some representation there that works really well. But just the sum of the parts just left me a little bit wanting as a whole overall. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but it does it in a more complex, less satisfying way, in the same vibe that I just played with the Undaunted Battle for Britain game this weekend, which takes a very similar system of the maneuvering, the turning, the firing, but it just adds a whole nother layer with the die allocation. And I love the die allocation and choosing. I love the real time, but it just doesn't port over to this board nearly as well as I think it should or could, just by some of the changes that you need to get on some of these boards to actually make things worthwhile and meaningful. Because this is a game where you could go for many, many turns not being able to get somebody and just being left high and dry, especially if there's only two ships on the map in the first place. I know and I see what it's trying to do, but at the same time, it just falls short for me in those manners. And I'm not really sure why, because otherwise, in a whole, this game should be a game that I love, and I was expecting to like it more than I did. But for those reasons, I just have a hard time wanting to go back to it. There's nothing inherently bad about this game. It's just that comparatively to others in the genre of the simultaneous real-time play, or the turn-by-turn simulation of maneuvering on the map and trying to take the other person out, I'm just not sure it does those aspects as cleanly and as succinctly as I would have liked. It just allows you to have those turns that you don't feel like you're getting meaningful die representation because you're not getting the things that you need, or because you're not able to then roll these dice again to actually hit in the first place. And that's just unsatisfying when there's not as much mitigation necessarily as you'd like in this setting. So I wanted to like it more, but there you go. The fourth game here is Sigil, recently abstract on crowdfunding. And essentially what you're doing is you've got your blue and you've got your red tokens, and you're slowly filling this board up, trying to get a majority more than your opponent. At any one time, if you have 3 more stones than your opponent, you win the game. Sounds simple, sounds straightforward. You lay down one at a time. You manipulate one of 9 different spells that are on the board if you occupy all the slots in a spell, to allow you to achieve those victory conditions in a slightly easier manner. Again, the concept in a whole is relatively straightforward. Starting area. Depending on how many of these 3 special areas around the outside you control, well, when you cast a spell, essentially, you have an area full of that spell, you have to remove all of the stones on the area minus the controlling of these. So if I control only one of these outside areas, well, it's going to cost me 2 of the 3 stones. But if for some reason I controlled all 3, well, then that's the cool aspect of this game, is all 9 of these spells are going to cost you anywhere from 1 to 3 to 5, depending on the size. And they're all different. Hard placement, soft placement, removal. There's additional get rid of 2, gain 1 somewhere else. And essentially all you're doing on your turn is you're taking one of your pieces and you're placing it in an adjacent to one of your other pieces. It just has to be connected by one of these lines. And so you can slowly march your way out, but you're only playing essentially almost 1 per turn. But what happens here is you start to meet areas, and this is where the pushing happens. So for example, in this area, if I want to play a red there, I take this over. Well, there is an open spot for that one to get pushed. That's considered a soft move. Let's say though that now blue really wants that back. So blue says, I'm going to place this one here, but there's now no place for red to get pushed to, so red is just destroyed. And that's the dynamic you're going for in addition with casting the spells. But when you cast the spells, you have 2 lock dice. These lock dice essentially mean when you cast this spell, it means that I can't cast that spell again. This one is in lockdown for me until I go and I cast a different spell on the board. The game goes until somebody casts 6 spells, or like I said, you have this dynamic in the middle where if you have more than 3 than your opponent, you win. You know me, I love abstract games. And so when I saw this, the combination of asymmetric spells with a little bit of area control and abstracts, I said, yeah, man, this sounds kind of cool. I'll say though, I'm not the biggest fan of it, unfortunately. The concept is there. The execution is there. I understand it up here. But as this board starts to get filled, you will constantly find yourself counting, recounting, counting, recounting how many reds, how many blues, trying to automatically adjust this. And that gets a little bit wearisome. Not a ton, but it's just, again, in other games, the end scoring condition is more straightforward. I like the locking down the spells. I think that's very important because otherwise there's a couple spells in this that you will spam and you can win in 2 turns or 3 turns if you were able to cast them in a row. And so the fact that it does lock it down and say you can't do this one again until you do something else really does matter, and it makes the other person pivot. And the fact that, I mean, this is a nice assortment and variety of spells. They're all asymmetrically different and unique. There's even a couple extra of each level spell in the box that aren't used each round, so the combination of spells is also going to be different each game. I guess one of the things I was not a big a fan of is that just that pushing mechanic that I showed you, right? Because, okay, all of a sudden, nowhere to push. Okay, can't have that one. Oh, I'm going to take this one. Oh, but then I'm going to cast the spell, so I'm going to lose it. But then this guy's going to go back there. And, you know, you can just have that back and forth in some of these abstract type games that doesn't really advance the game as much. And that's going to be player and player dependent, right? Because if we're going to battle over this, maybe I am better off than placing my one over here next to be able to go over here. And so that's probably the biggest detriment, is you can find yourself getting into a little bit of a loop like that if there's one area that you find that you really want. And that's what I found myself struggling with from this game. I think the design is solid. I'm just not sure I personally like the combination of these things as much as I was, again, expecting to like when you take an abstract and an asymmetric power type situation, and I normally am a huge fan of. For some reason, it just didn't click with me as much as I would have liked, because the concept is fantastic, actually. I think I'd almost like it a little bit more if it was cast 6 spells or cast a certain number of each level of spell, and then the game ends and whoever has more at that point wins. I guess the other thing is this game could also go very quickly, the opposite of the stalemate that I was just showing with the back and forth, right? In terms of taking it over and placing it and that, because if you get someone who's more experienced and you are going to be more aggressive with some of these spells, this one, for example, the Carnage, might make 4 hard moves. Okay, 1, and then, you're taking other hard moves. You might not even have enough for 4 hard moves, but that can really swing the whole game in one spell as well. And so if you're really aggressive about this game could also be over very quickly in addition, which is a good thing, actually, in an abstract game. You don't want abstracts to belabor themselves and outstay their welcome. And so, again, I think it's a good, solid game, but for some reason, me and it are just not as good as fit as I was hoping for. And you know what? That's okay. That happens. But if you like this style of things, give it a look-see. The last game up here is Ruse. Just recently finished funding over on Kickstarter. Successful dice worker placement. And I'll tell you right now, this game is probably one of the heaviest games in terms of complexity and interactions and just stuff going on that I have probably played on this channel. And I've played some recently decent heavy games like Unconscious Mind and those sorts of things, right? And this one probably takes the cake. And I don't say that as a positive or negative. I say that as a game that really doesn't even have a weight scoring on Board Game Geek, something that you need to know if you're looking at this. You have, for example, 3 different boards that you are going to be having to manage, in addition to all that is going on here in the actual main board itself, with the 4 different seasonal areas, the destiny tiles, the turn order tracks, the asymmetric win objectives, as well as the asymmetric powers that you're going to be given at the beginning of the game in the first place. One of the best dynamics in this game is when you have these dice and you roll them and you're placing them in these locations that are going to be available to you, and you're choosing at some point whether or not this 6 is more valuable as a victory point or taking more actions in said location in the first place, which is a really cool, unique mechanic, especially as the late game progresses. I also like the fact that day and night, depending on what you roll on the destiny die up here, also gives you a different amount of actions that you're going to be having to essentially mitigate or deal with on a round by round basis. The dice are also used in a clever way, allowing you each round to grow your kit or your den, because it's sort of a scaled value. 1s and 2s get you a certain amount of growth, 2s and 3s and 4s get you another amount of growth, 5s and 6s also give you a scaled amount of growth different. And that goes back with the dynamic of the actual value of the dice, because you're going to get more growth with the lower numbers to mitigate out the lesser of the value, but you're going to have less in terms of the actions that are going to be helpful in that sense. So it's a nice dynamic of balance there. The actual game dynamics themselves, although this map looks incredibly busy without half the tokens on it that it comes with, you have your area control track, you've got your sort of area over here, which is sort of a catch-all for these areas that aren't going to give you what you want in the first place. Like I said, your destiny area and your asymmetric objective area. You only play over 4 rounds, which is also kind of nice. It's a relatively time-limited game in that sense, because this game could also, I could see, overstay its welcome. You have sort of your territory control board over here, which gives you your one-time bonuses as you progress up each of these 4 different areas. You're also going to have a hunter or a bear or a wolf that's going to be interacting in these areas that's going to restrict what you can do when and where it is, depending on how they move around and what actions you need to do in those areas in the first place. So there's not as much head-to-head player-player interaction. If you're looking for that game, this is going to be better for you, but there is some stuff in that sense, especially at the higher player count, that's going to affect you more in terms of being able to do what you want at all times. Because I know with a lot of these games, when you're moving your foxes around, when you're moving your workers around, essentially, you want not to be able to just do everything easily all the time. I know people really look for that in these games. That's what they define, I think, more of the time as crunchy, right? Or very strategic long-term. This has a high amount of tactical strategy as well in that sense. And there's enough going on between these 3 boards and the main board that if you're looking for something like this, this is definitely going to be at least a medium weight Euro if that intrigues you. I'll be frank with you guys. It's a very solid game. It's too heavy for me. And I have no qualms about saying that, right? Like, we all play games and we go, this is too light for me, this is too heavy. There's not enough choice and strategy going on. There's just too much. And this one probably falls a little bit on the heavier side of things for me. And so it's not right for me, and that's okay. The mechanics, though, are very solid. If you're looking for something on the medium, heavier side of things in terms of Euro with a dice worker placement aspect, give it a look-see. There you go. 5 games. Short and sweet. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to see. Let me know what games you want me to talk about in the future. Stay classy. See you guys around.